Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Bree. Today's video, we're going to be going through all the books I read in the month of November. I have quite a big stack here. I have, I think, 12 books to talk to you about. So we're just going to go from the least fantastical to the most fantastical. And again, all of this is subjective and just fun to organize. So we're going to do it that way. So the first book I have to talk to you about is a book I read on ebook, and that is Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. This is at the least fantastical side of the equation because it is nonfiction and is very much talking about what's going on in our real world today. So this is a collection of speeches and interviews with Angela Davis, and it's over a span of many years. And in this, she's really talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and the prison system in the US, and also she's relating it to things going on around the world. So she talks about Palestine a lot and what's happened there with the colonization and the genocide. And while this was published before what's going on now, it also details a lot of what happened during the Nakba in 1948. So you're getting a lot of information and you're seeing how many things we deal with in the US specifically you can see in a global scale. And so we are just getting interviews where she talks about the prison system in Palestine and the prison system in the US. We're seeing just how racism has really made an impact on our society. And yeah, it's very good. It's very educational. I would highly recommend it. If you're looking for something about Palestine, I think that it doesn't really give you the history of Palestine. And the whole book is kind of assuming that you have a little bit of knowledge about these topics because it is speeches and interviews. She is talking to an audience that she kind of assumes knows stuff, so a lot of things are kind of inferred. It's not a like essay collection where she's diving into the topic for the first time, but I do think it was very accessible to read and very interesting to read. I think that a lot of people could gain a lot out of it even without having like a ton of background knowledge. So if you're looking for something that's really detailing like history of what happened in Palestine, this book wasn't it, but it was very good, very informative, and I would highly recommend it. I think it's one that can really be helpful for a broad range of people because it's not very specific or dense. It's very digestible, as I've said. So that was Freedom is a Constant Struggle by Angela Davis. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it already. So let's go to the next one, which is not really fantastical at all, which is why it's on the bottom as well, though I did enjoy it. So that is Warrior Girl Unearthed by Angeline Woolley, and this is a follow-up to Firekeeper's Daughter. In Firekeeper's Daughter, we're following Donis, who is going through an investigation with the FBI going undercover to infiltrate this drug problem that's happening in her community. And in this one, we're following Perry Firekeeper Birch, who is Donis's niece. And in this, she is having an internship where she is working with artifacts and trying to get them back from museums and get reparations. No, that's the wrong word. Repatriation. I always mix these words up. She's looking to get repatriation. Yes, that's the word. So she's working with a professor to try to get these artifacts back from museums to their community, and it's a very hard, difficult process. Even though there are laws in place that are meant to return these artifacts to Native communities, there's a lot of loopholes and barriers. So it's a lot about that and what Native communities have to do to get their artifacts back, and especially it deals a lot with like how a lot of their bodies of their ancestors were dug up and taken and now are in museums and are just like sitting there, and they want to have them back to rebury them, and the museums just are not working with them. And there's also a lot about like private collectors and selling these artifacts and bodies and stuff for like tons of money. So it's a lot about that and how messed up that is. It's also a bit of a coming of age novel. She's working through a lot. There's a lot that goes down in here. And while I enjoyed it, I didn't enjoy it as much as Firekeeper's Daughter. I think that there were a lot of things that she did well, and like the conversation she was having in this was very powerful and very worth the read, but the pacing and the like way things unfolded were just a little bit hard to get into. The pacing itself was just it would be a little slow and then would kind of ramp up, and then the end, I just feel like it didn't come together in quite the way I was thinking, and it was a little confusing to figure out like how all these things came together. I will say that she did say in the back that she took 10 years to write Firekeeper's Daughter, and then in this one she needed to write a sequel, and so she ended up writing this in about a year. And I just think that it Not that a year is not a long time, because it is. I just think Firekeeper's Daughter, just, you could see how much intention and how much she wove into everything. Like, she really thought through every part of that story, and this just felt like a little more rushed to me, but I still enjoyed it, and I would recommend both of them as well. I think just the conversation she's having in here and the way she shows her Anishinaabe community, and you can just see like the love and respect she has for it, while also the critiques of it, and so I really, really enjoy it, and I would recommend, though it wasn't a fave. Then we have a sci-fi that I was hesitant to try just because of sci-fi not really being my genre, but I went ahead and picked it up because I saw it on the Goodreads Choice Awards, and it really has been one that I've been intrigued by because it has really good reviews from people I've seen, and so I wanted to give it a try, and that was Changing All-Stars by Nanakwame Adjei-Brenyah, and this is a post-apocalyptic, that's not right. This is a story set in the future where the US has basically reformed the prison system. Basically, you can go to prison, but you can also opt into these trials where you are competing against other people to the death to survive, and you have to go through so many trials essentially until you are freed, and then your sentence is like commuted and you can go out into the world, but you have to kill lots of people to do so. And so it's very much like Gladiators, but talking about the prison system in the US, and it is really messed up. We're getting lots of point of views. We're mainly following Thurwar and Stax as these two women who are in the same chain, and if you're in a chain, that means like you're grouped together. You don't compete against each other, you compete against other chains, and they're the best chain in the whole league, I guess you would call it. Thurwar is just a couple games away from getting her freedom, and Stax is just underneath that as well. And it's about their stories and getting through these trials and their romance together and how they kind of have to come together as a chain, and really the horrific things that go on and they have to deal with just to gain their freedom for the things that they did to get them into prison. And everyone has like a different reason for being in prison, and really he's critiquing the prison system in the US, and I think it was a really good read to pair with the Angela Davis Freedom is Constant Struggle, because everything she was talking about in there is really dove into in here in a way that's very nuanced and talks a lot about the prison system. There's footnotes throughout the book that you can see where he actually brings up things that go on in the US and went on in the history of the US, and how like things have come to be in the prison system we have today, while also then like showing how it would be in the future. And it's also, we get perspectives of just audience members, people who paid for this and are really interested in these games, and you also get perspectives of the higher ups who are the ones who control everything. And it's just a very bleak story. It's a story that's really just critiquing really hard the prison system in the US, and I think it did such a good job. I left this feeling like I wanted more answers, like I wanted resolution, but I also feel like this book couldn't have a full resolution. Like that wasn't going to be the option or the point of this book. And so I actually really do like the way it ended after some reflection, and I have to give this 5 stars. I think it was such an interesting read, and I really, really recommend the audiobook. It's a full cast narration, and there's 4 different narrators, and they all do a wonderful job, and I think it really, really brought the book to life. But I would highly recommend it, and I will be picking up one of these copies for me because it's one that really made me think and also really got me into the sci-fi genre as something I could read. So this is kind of, I guess, dystopian, and so maybe I need to pick up more dystopian in the future. But I really liked it. Highly recommend. Another 5-star favorite. Now we're getting into the realm of more fantasy. I didn't put that one in fantasy because it felt more just like futuristic than fantasy, but now we're getting more into what I would call like fantastical. So let's talk about Dread Nation by Justine Ireland. I picked this up right after Changing All-Stars, and I'm just on a high for these books because this one is also 5 stars. I have had this on my shelf for probably since I started booktube. It was one of like my first book hauls that I did, and I picked these up, and I have the first and second. It's a duology, and I didn't pick it up for the longest time because later I learned it was about zombies, and zombies are not really my thing, but man, did I love this book. First of all, they never are called zombies. They are called, what are they called again? They call them shamblers, and this is set in the post-Civil War. I don't know if it gives me an actual date, but it was basically during the Civil War. Instead of the Civil War finishing, there was an infection that made people come back to life and become zombies, and that stopped the Civil War. All the slaves were freed, but they've basically been sent now to these different schools to train to protect the white people from zombies. And we're following our main girl, Jane, and she is at a school for girls that she has to learn how to fight, and she's a very, very good fighter. And she also has a frenemy, Catherine, who is also top of her class, and they both just like butt heads. They have very different personalities, and you're following her as she's at the school and kind of getting herself into some trouble. She has a boy in town that she is friends with and kind of has a thing for, and he comes to her and says that his sister is now missing, and she starts to try to figure out what's going on, and things in the town kind of get weird because they're having more disappearances and more attacks, even though the shamblers are supposed to be not as prevalent right now. They're supposed to be more under control. It's just a lot about her trying to survive shamblers or zombies, as well as the white people who are just making her life so difficult, because it's essentially like another look at slavery. Like, it wasn't, they're technically free and they have to be paid, but they have horrific conditions and are really put on the front lines of these zombie attacks. This is narrated by Bonnie Turpin, and I loved it. I think she does such a good job with the narration. I really love Jane as a character. I think she was really fun to listen to. There's so many times where she thinks to herself, she says something and she goes, I know I should have held my tongue, but I couldn't keep it in. And she just like is impulsive and believes in what she believes in and stands up for it, and I really admire that about her. Even though it gets her into a lot of trouble. So it looks at a lot of different struggles that Black women have to face, and I really, really loved it. It takes a turn in the middle of the book and goes like in a different direction than I thought it was going to go, and I loved it. This leaves off on a cliffhanger as well, and I can't wait to pick up the next one. So this is another 5-star for me. I'm just having a great time with historical fantasy this year, and I'm finding some really good wins. So happy to have picked this up. This is one of those books that sat on my shelf for so long, and I should have picked it up sooner, and I'm so glad I did now because it was really good. And I can't wait to get to Deathless Divide, which is the second one. Now we're into magical realism, and I guess I didn't really know how to put these two together because while this is magical realism, this feels a bit more fantasy to me. That's The Cat Who Saved Books by Suzuki Natsukawa, and this is translated from Japanese by Louise Hill Kawai. And this is a short little book about a boy who has recently lost his grandfather, and his grandfather looked after him and also owned this bookshop that he spent a lot of time in as a child and growing up, and he is now like a teenager, and he is given the bookstore to run, but he also has a distant aunt who's coming to pick him up and take care of him, and it's a lot dealing with grief. While he's in this bookshop, he's just really obviously sad at losing his grandfather and going through so much and dealing with the fact that he now has to leave this bookshop. And in walks this cat who tells him he needs his help to save these books, and he ends up having to go through 3 different labyrinths in his time with the cat to talk to different people who are treating books in different ways. So we have someone who is ripping pages out of books and things like that, and he has to go talk to them and try to see if they can change their ways. And it's a lot about books, but it's also a lot about grief and just the process of going through it, and he works through it while working with this cat to save books. And I really liked it. I read it in my cozy fantasy vlog, so you can see that up here if you want. I will leave it linked. It was sweet, it was cozy. While you're dealing with grief, you're dealing with it in a very like cozy and heartwarming way, and so for that I really liked it. I would just say it was interesting, but it wasn't something that I think I will go back to over and over again. But if you like books about books, I think this is like truly a book about books. It's got a lot to do with books. So if you're someone who often finds that when things are said to be books about books, they don't really hit, I think this one really does. It really dives into books and how books are treated and like views on books. So yeah, this was The Cat Who Saved Books. So I've been trying to prioritize getting some series finished before the end of the year because one of my goals was to complete more series in this year. So I had a series I started in October, and I decided to just finish it out because it was a duology. So in November, I read The 2 Twisted Crowns by Rachel Gillick. This is the second in the, I think it's like Monster Maiden series. duology? I don't know what the duology's name is. Oh, it literally says it there. The Shepherd King. um, that was way off. So this is the follow-up to One Dark Window. The words are just so hard today. So the first one leaves off on a very big cliffhanger, and we're just literally jumping off from where we left off into the second one. And I really enjoyed the first one. I think I would give it around a 4-star, but this one I would give around a 3-star. I enjoyed the way it wrapped up, but I just felt like I didn't care for it as much as I did the first one. The way the first one leaves off, we're not following the main couple, Raven and Elspeth. It didn't have the same like feeling as the first one. So I would say maybe like a 3-star if I gave the other one a 4. I don't really have a lot to talk about this one. I feel like it's one of those where I read it and I was like, oh, okay, I enjoyed the ending. It was fine, but I don't really have a lot of thoughts on it. So that sucks because I did really enjoy the first one. It's just, it didn't do anything bad. It just didn't really capture my attention the way the first one did. Now the last ones I would say are very fantastical, and they were kind of hard to rank because they all are fantastical in their own way. These feel very like other world, like we're in a different world entirely. And so the fourth to final book is Rogue Protocol by Martha Wells. This is the third in the Murder Bot series, and we're following Murderbot, and it just goes around and is in charge of saving humans. It's called a SEC unit, and they are robots that have to like protect humans at all costs, and it really just is kind of doesn't want to do that. It just wants to watch its soaps and just get away. And so in the first one, that has to help save these humans, and it unravels this bigger like mystery conspiracy going on, and there's an event that happened in its past, and it is now trying to figure out why that occurred and like what's going on. And so this one just goes even more off of that plot, and we're in this like deserted kind of what do you call it, like station, and it's there to try to figure out why this is deserted and like what's going on. So I enjoyed it. It makes me laugh out loud every time. I loved Artificial Condition, which is the second one, so much that it had this like friendship between Murderbot and this other AI that I really loved. And this one didn't have that in it, and so it just wasn't as good, but I would still highly rate the series. I still think it was a fun time, and I flew through it. They're really short, literally 150 pages, so I read this in one sitting, and I just had a good time with it. Again, these are ones that it's hard for me to give full thoughts because it's further in a series, and the series is building off of itself, and so I have a hard time coming up with more thoughts to tell you that wouldn't be spoilers. But just know that I did enjoy it, and I will be continuing. Now, this is also me catching up in series and getting through what is out, and that is Lost in the Moment and Found by Shauna McGuire. I put this off for a really long time. Actually, I put off the one before it and this one because I knew that this one deals with abuse of a child, and it was just a topic that I knew was going to be super hard to get through and read, and it was done so well in terms of care for this. You can just tell how much this meant to her to write, and I also really liked the author's note at the beginning. It even just like thinking about it makes me tear up. It just is very heartfelt, and it was a very good story. I think the beginning part is very hard to read for a reason, and it doesn't go like too far in terms of like graphic and stuff like that. It's still handled with a lot of care, but it is definitely uncomfortable to read. And then we are following Nancy as she runs away from this situation and goes through a portal into this world that lost things go there and collect there, and then people come for their lost things and they get them back, and they can also go through these doors that go to different markets and stuff. And it was very interesting, and I really liked the way it ended. I think it had a really interesting message to share. I think it was a lot about innocence being stolen and just like the impact of that on a child. And yeah, I really liked how this went. I really think it's one of my favorites, though the hardest one to read so far. And I can't wait to see what the next one does, because the next one is going to be not in a portal world. It's going to be at the School for Wayward Children, and they usually like build off of each other. So I'm just interested to see what that does that builds off of this. So yeah, I highly recommend this series if you haven't read it already. They're very much about children who go through something hard and escape into these other worlds and what they learn and how they have to grow up in these other worlds. And I just highly recommend the series. This one especially was so good, though so difficult to read. So that's Lost in the Moment and Found. Then we have a very lighthearted book, and that is Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldree. This is the prequel to the cozy fantasy Legends and Lattes. And in this, we're following our orc Viv as she is still in the beginning of her time as I never know what to call her, a mercenary, I think is what they're calling her, a mercenary. It's about her time as a mercenary, and in this, she is injured, and so she stops off at this seaside town, and she is just recovering. And while she's there, she meets a Radican named Fern and Pot Roast, which is the Radican's little dog bird friend. And it's just about them like trying to make this bookshop come back to life because Fern is really struggling to keep it afloat and might have to close it soon. So Viv is helping to get people to come and buy from this bookshop again. And also there is another mystery of this person that they were chasing when she was with her mercenary group before she got injured. It was very good. It was, again, like that cozy feeling without being high stakes, but still having an adventure to it. But I will say some people's critiques of this was that, like, Viv ends up in another city in Legends and Lattes. So, like, this felt like, why are we developing these friendships and stuff when we're leaving? And while I didn't feel that from the friendships and stuff, I do think there is like a little bit, I can see where people are coming from for it. So I do think you could read them either order. I don't feel like this one's ruined by not reading Legends and Lattes first, and I don't think Legends and Lattes would be ruined if you read this one first. So it's really dependent on what you like more. This one is much more adventure and like a little bit more of like Viv as she's more of a mercenary, where I think Legends and Lattes is a little more chill, more about building this bookshop, or not bookshop, building this coffee shop and the slow paced lifestyle and just like learning who she is outside of the fighting, where this is very much she's still in like the fighting mindset. So I recommend it. I would give it probably like a 4-star, where I gave Legends and Lattes 5 stars. So that's Bookshops and Bone Dust. I do recommend it very much. The last I'm going to talk about as one because they are in a series, so it's the second and the third in the Tea Dragon Society graphic novels. The second one, we are going to a festival, and this is back in time from the first one. So it's the backstory, part of the backstory to Eric and Ezekiel, and they are visiting Eric's hometown, where we are mainly following Eric's sister, and she finds a dragon that was asleep in the woods, and it's about like just her and finding herself and how she has to come to terms with like what she is good at and what she wants to do with her life versus what she thinks is expected of her. And I really enjoyed it. I would give this 5 stars. This one is about back in the time period of the first one, and we're still following our main 2 girls and Eric and Ezekiel, though it's mainly about the 2 girls. So Greta is training to be an apprentice for a blacksmith, and she's kind of trying to get him to accept her as her apprentice, and so she has to make a object for him, and he has to approve it to become her trainer, mentor. And then Minette is dealing with some stuff that was revealed in the first one about her past, and she's coming to terms with a lot about herself and her future and like what is in store for her essentially. And I really enjoyed this one as well. This one's probably my favorite because of how much it dives into with Minette and like grieving a life that she could have had and being okay with like the life she has to live now. And she also has to talk to Eric, who is in a wheelchair after an accident that he had a long time ago, and he has to mentor her through this like these feelings of grief. It really stuck with me as someone who has been sick for over 12 years now, and having to come to terms with the life that you feel like you should have had, or if you weren't sick, all the things that you could be doing. That is something I really had to work through, and it's mirrored in this, though in different ways for each person. I just really connected with it, and so this made me super emotional, and it was something that I'm really happy to read because these cozy books just let you go through these tough emotions in a very heartwarming and way that feels safe, and I really appreciated that about them. So I would highly recommend this little trilogy. God, words are so hard. This trilogy graphic novel series if you haven't already, because they're The Sweetest, Most Wholesome Things. They're my favorite graphic novels ever, I think. Close second, I have Bug Boys and Garlic and the Witch, but this one just like speaks to my soul in a way that I can't describe. You just have to read it if you want to know. So very happy I got to those. I've been putting them off because I knew how much they were going to mean to me, but I'm finally happy I got to them, and I will definitely be rereading them at some point in the future. So there you go. There are all the books I read in the month of November. I had a great reading month. I hope that you did too. And if you want to let me know down in the comments like what books you're racing to read before the end of the year, because I know a lot of people are trying to get in all the reads before December ends. I'd love to know what you're reading and what you're prioritizing in the month of December. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.